now go to Chair Linda Hansen on lawn licensing.
Okay, so ours is kind of short this time too. The meeting wasn't short, but the report's going to be. Okay, so we approved the minutes, and then we talked about the licensing revisions that we're starting to work on those. So we had a discussion on those with Diana and Travis, gave them some suggestions. Then we worked a little on R277 613 LEA bullying, cyberbullying, hazing, and harassment policies and training. We took some board action, our committee action on it, and then we voted unanimously to approve the amendments on first reading, and then asked that the rule come back to us again, and we'll be working on it again tomorrow. I think that we have a subcommittee that's working on this, and I think that they've come up with a good revision now, but we want public comment on it as well. So we'll be looking at that some more tomorrow. So there's no motion there. We had a report on bullying and hazing amendments, a progress report from Student Advocacy Services, and that kind of went along with R277-613 as well. Okay, then we had R277-705, Secondary School Completion Diplomas. This is a working group, special ed working group, has been working for about a year to create an alternate diploma for students with disabilities and also a career credential. The staff presented the working group's recommendation. You can see those there. And we voted unanimously to approve R277-705 as amended and continued on first reading, and move that the board we move that the board approve R277-705 as amended and continued on second and final reading.
Okay, the motion before the board is that the board approve R277-705 as amended and continued on second and final reading. Any discussion to the motion? Did someone say yeah? Oh, you did?
No, he's talking over here.
Oh, okay. I'm not seeing any discussion. Let's vote. Oh, I do.
I'm sorry, just a question. So is it noted that this is an alternative diploma on the diploma?
It could be noted. You know, it's up to the LEAs to determine it, but it cannot say that they're special ed kids.
So this does not say that they're special ed kids.
Right.
It may or may not indicate this is an alternative diploma. Is that correct?
Right.
Can you speak to the thoughts behind that, behind those decisions?
Well, I will, I'll try. So right now, what happens is in order for a student to go into post-high, which is 18 to 22, they have to short themselves credits. Okay? And so, so that's what happens. So parents have to be aware, and they say, okay, we want to short them credits. So once they get a diploma, they're done. They're done with school, okay? And so if they want to go to post-high, like I said, they short them credits. This would allow them to still graduate and continue on into post-high without shorting them credits. So they could still graduate and then go to post-high. This was made possible by a change in ESSA, the federal law, for special ed kids.
Okay. Any other? Not seeing any. Let's vote on the motion. And the motion is that from the committee is that the board approve R277-705 as amended and continued on second and final reading. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, voting is unanimous. Please continue.
Okay, then we heard from USEEP, and I don't know if do you guys know who USEEP is. USEEP is our Special Ed Advisory Panel, and they gave us some recommendations on licensing. And so there's two that they emphasized. They wanted to see pre-service educators receive training on best practices that benefit all students. and they wanted to see a minimum competency requirement for the proposed associate educator and LEA-specific licenses. So as we're working on licensing, that we will be considering those as well. R277211-8, disciplinary letters and dismissal. We talked about this one, and we had a report from Dave and Brian. Dave especially had been working on this and indicated to us that it was unnecessary, so we tabled it.
Okay, we have a comment on that, board member, or a question, board member Lear.
I actually would like, and tell me if this procedure's not accurate or right, but I would like to take this off of the table of the committee and put it before the board for discussion,
Okay.
this issue, because as you can see, the committee vote was very mixed. Scott and Linda favored it, and I did not, and then Michelle and Elisa were undecided. So I think it's appropriate for the board, and I have an amendment to the rule
Okay.
that was originally proposed that I'd like to
Well,
propose.
if we're
Actually,
going to
the-
take action, right now, it's coming out of committee. It didn't come out of committee to take an action. We're not prepared today to take action because it's not on our agenda, but we could certainly put it on our next agenda if you, and of course, we have our practice of another.
So I can't just get it up off the table?
Yeah.
I
that is-
cannot, is that?
Yes. Okay. Other comments?
Sorry, but just procedurally, sorry, but I do believe that it is on the agenda, and so you can make a motion to take action on something that was tabled in committee or didn't pass in committee. That's my understanding of how Robert's.
Can I also make
It's not on our, go ahead. Hang on.
just so you know,
That's your
the
consideration.
vote was 4-1. So to table it, so everyone voted to table it except Carol.
Well, that's not what it says.
Yes, it does.
It goes on to say, we're undecided. Oh, in the final action. Thank you. I think still my comment
Oh, yeah, we
stands,
can
is I
get a
think
second.
there was a lot of controversy on the issue, and I think it would be appropriate for the whole board to discuss this.
Which is
So
in our
tell me how
bylaw,
to
so
do it.
you can make the motion to discuss, to bring this forward, and if there's a second, then we'll have discussion
Today, right now.
right now.
Oh, then I move that we discuss this and have a more complete discussion about it right now.
Okay, we have a motion to bring,
277-211.
to bring this, to bring R277-211-8. So it's, and we have a second?
Second.
And we second for discussion. So you want to speak to your motion to have that come before the board?
You want me to speak to what I'd like to have discussed?
Yeah, you brought
Is that
it
what you're
up,
saying?
so you get to be the first to speak
Okay.
to whatever it is.
I have a proposed amendment to the rule as it exists, which I prefer to tabling the whole issue. And let me, I've got a copy of that I will pass around right now. The red shows the new language.
I didn't vote. So we have a motion and a second. Now we need to vote to see if we hear it.
Oh.
Thank you.
Discuss it.
All right. So all in favor to Carol's motion, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No,
Okay, with the ayes, raise their hand. We have one, two, three, four. Laura, are you there? Okay, I can't see. 4, 5, 6, 7, and I'm the dividing, or I'm the deciding, I'm the, hold it, how many do you have?
So could you say their names out?
Okay. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins, Board Member Lear, Board Member Gravitt, Board Member Cannon. So on this side, that's 1, 2, 3, 4.
Michelle changed.
Board Member Reeby, 5. Board Member Bolter, 6. Vice Chair, 7. Yeah, I did. So we have 8. Okay. So you have 8? Okay, one more time. No. Didn't get Michelle.
Okay, now we
Me too.
Okay. Angie, will you please come up?
Want me to tell?
I think we're going to have to get something up on the board for me to
Because
speak
I'm-
intelligently. I want to follow something. I understand, but we have that opportunity. Get to do it. Okay. Okay, Angie, have you seen this? So you haven't reviewed, or you haven't, your fingerprints aren't on this amendment? Okay. Okay, board,
There were 20 copies, so it should be.
where's the copies? I don't have. Is there any other? This is rolling out really good. I don't have, who's got copies?
Did you get my?
No, I don't have a I want to,
Well, they might be on the floor. I need a copy.
somebody's holding this up. We, all right. I want you to speak to your motion, but I want to be able to follow along.
Like, we need a lesson on passing papers.
Okay, the motion is that this
Our
comes up
counting.
for discussion. The motion isn't to accept some amendment. I'm just wanting to be really clear. You didn't make
It's to
that.
allow the discussion, is all. I understood.
Okay, and we're,
Before discussion?
Then she can make a motion.
yeah. No, right now, it's in discussion to this particular item. And it was voted unanimously for discussion, not an amendment, because it was never stated.
No, I just wanted to discuss it.
Just for discussion.
Just as discussion. Okay.
So
Carol, would you please speak to your?
could I maybe have everybody's attention?
I like to have that now and again myself. Okay, Carol, will you please,
I was just kind of waiting till everybody was ready.
I know, you might not get what you want.
I know. I can
know.
live with that, but at least I'll get a chance to discuss it.
Yes,
The amendment is to this rule where educators are disciplined. As I looked at last month's agenda and this month's agenda, and it really only deals with individuals who receive disciplinary letters less than reprimands. So this would be letters of admonishment, letters of warning. I looked at those situations on last month's agenda, the previous month's agenda, this month's agenda, and almost every single one of them, I couldn't tell you exact numbers, had left that district where they were formerly employed, almost immediately when the investigation began. So they were not employed by that district. So my concern is that if we're concerned about privacy, if we're concerned about appropriate protection of people's information, that if this were my child or my brother or sister and that person had left employment with a school district, I would not want a letter about that person's problem going back to their former employer where there is no longer any kind of relationship. Understand the idea of letting the complainant know what the disposition of the case is. I think that's important. I also think it's reasonable, though I don't necessarily agree with it, that if the person's still employed in that school district, that the letter describing the problem, however much of a form letter it is, however not a form letter it is, I have a problem with that going back to a former employer. So this amendment that I'm proposing says that the information would go to an LEA if the person's still employed. with these minor discipline areas. If the person's no longer employed, the disposition of the case would go to the former, or to the complainant, assuming it's the school district or the charter school. It's not always. But the disposition of the case would go to the complainant. But the letter, if the person's not still employed, would not go to the former LEA that employed the person. So that's what my amendment proposes. And that's why I think it's so important. I think it's a privacy issue for someone who no longer has a relationship with that LEA.
Okay. I believe you're done, right? For
I
right
am
now?
done for now.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Board Member Hanson, and then I see Belknap down there.
And I think maybe we should, this is Ben's process. And the thing is that Ben is right now already doing the process, and that's why they said it wasn't necessary. Ben's doing this process, and Carol didn't like the process that Ben was using, basically, and so she brought this forward. So, but there's nothing, maybe we could have Ben describe what his process is and what he does, so you guys could see that broader issue. I think that would be helpful.
So you want Ben to comment?
Yeah, I would like Ben to describe it.
Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices, Chair. Essentially, we do send a copy of the letter of warning to the employer of record, and if there was an LEA that reported the matter to UPAC, we copy them on the letter of warning. The letter of warning doesn't go into great detail about what the allegations are. There's usually a sentence or two. We tell them that they've received a letter of warning. If we were the way this is written, I think the letters would be largely the same. We just change the form. They'd still contain the same substance of it. It would just we'd just have to send 2 letters instead of 1, but create 2 letters instead of 1. I'm happy to carry out the board's policy however the board sees fit, as I recommended to the committee. And I don't think this is necessarily appropriate or needed in rule, but I'm happy to follow whatever instruction the board gives me.
Okay, one follow-up, and then,
One
but I'm going to
follow-up,
get back
and
to you,
so-
Board Member Lear, but
so
I want to
my-
get some of these others before.
That's fine.
My thought and what we discussed in law and licensing is I don't want to micromanage staff's jobs and so that's why I voted against this, because I don't think we need to say everything in rule that we want staff to do. If that's Ben's job to decide what the process is, and I think that he hasn't done anything, Dave looked into it, it's not an illegal process, there's no problem with the process, and so I just don't want to micromanage everything that staff does in rule.
Okay, that's your follow-up. Okay, Board Member Belknap.
Carol, can you help me just a little bit on this? It only goes back to the district they're employed in, if they're still employed there. What if they are not employed at all? Does it go into the file 13, which we used to call in trash?
Board Member Lear, do you want to speak to her question?
Yes, that would be my thinking, that it wouldn't go to an employer because the person no longer has an employer. So there's no need to share, however lurid or not the details are of the situation, because the person's no longer employed, so there's no relationship. So apparently the process worked and the person's no longer in education.
Okay, follow-up, Board Member
I guess
Belknap.
maybe they're not for a year, but what about if they go back in a year? I guess I'm just wondering if there's reason for a reprimand, or I'm sorry, I might use the wrong words, okay? A letter of some type. Is there not a reason to have that for protection of our children? So just so it doesn't get lost. Sorry, thank you.
Can I respond to that for a minute?
Well, let me have Ben do
Okay.
it, but
Can I
save your thoughts, because I'm going to hit these others.
Can I just make one comment, because I hadn't noticed how the wording was here, but looking at it again, I do think this is problematic in that it limits my ability to only send a copy of the letter of warning to a current employer if they made the complaint. There's a statute that actually gives me authority to share this kind of thing with an LEA employer. I think that would contradict
What statute? would
my
that be
ability
in?
to do that. Let me pull it up here.
Okay, while you're
It's,
looking at, because,
53A6402.
oh, he's fast. Look at
Yeah,
Wait,
and
53.
I can,
Quick on the draw.
Let's-
and it,
Talk code.
And it says the board shall provide the appropriate administrator of a public or private school or of an agency outside the state that's responsible for licensing or certifying educational personnel with a recommendation or other information possessed by the board that has significant in evaluating the employment or license of a current or prospective school employee. I think if we're sending a letter of warning to a current or employee of an LEA, that falls under that category, that it has significance in their employment there and that their LEA should know about it, even if they weren't the ones that made the complaint.
But that's, no, okay, I'll wait to speak to that.
Okay, Board Member Stokes?
But if you don't work there, they have a current or prospective employee.
And I guess there's some questions about the process, but it would seem to me that if a teacher left employment and was, now working in some other profession, that the LEA would want to have a file folder when you pull out on that employee the entire record. So should that employee ever come back, that the finality or the last thing that happened is in that record. So I would speak against the motion and keep the current process that we have in place.
Okay. Board Member Reby?
So currently we have a lookup tool. So if you're trying to employ someone, you can use the lookup tool to see what kind of letters have been out there about them. That wouldn't apply to this?
These level letters wouldn't be on the lookup tool.
Oh, will you restate that? What?
These letters are not included in the lookup tool because they're considered minor letters. They're not put on Cactus as such for people to see. So these wouldn't be available on the lookup tool.
May I have a follow-up?
Follow up?
So they're leaving their place of employment, but it's just a minor letter?
Yes.
Okay. Board Member Cannon?
So I'm a little confused by that, because looking at this rule under E, it says update Cactus to reflect that the investigation is, update Cactus to reflect the disposition. What would be on Cactus?
So while we're investigating a case, we have a flag on Cactus that lets whoever's looking up the educator know that they should check with UPAC before they do anything with the educator. So we pull that flag off when the investigation's closed. That's just saying that that's what we do when we issue the letter.
Okay, so these letters of reprimand, letters of warning are not on Cactus?
It's recorded in Cactus, but it's not public.
Okay. So if someone were to think of employing this person and they checked Cactus, would they be able to see that?
No.
No.
Not on a letter of warning or a letter of admonishment, which is what we're talking about here.
Can you just give us a quick rundown of what kind of things would, be on that level? What kind of things would get a Gardner a level of warning, a letter of reprimand?
Getting a DUI might get you a letter of warning. Having a minor incident with a student or with a colleague might get you a letter of warning or admonishment. It's generally considered the lesser end of the spectrum of things that are sent to UPAC. A physical incident with a student might get you a letter of reprimand. One case that we have before the board later that a reprimand is proposed is for showing a film without screening the material appropriately and exposing students to some things. So, I mean, there's a whole litany of things that could fall there, but those are a couple examples.
Okay. Board Member Lear? Or no, Board Member Brittany, or
ahead,
Vice Chair
Brittany
Brittany Cummins,
first, and
I
I'll
think, was trying to get in.
I just have a question about section 3B. And it really is a question because I'm having a hard time following it. So you send a copy of a disciplinary letter or dismissal letter to the educator's current LEA of employment and the LEA that reported the allegations, only if the educator is currently employed at the LEA that made the complaint. And so if you have somebody that worked somewhere and they made a complaint, they're not working there anymore and they're working at B, so their current employer wouldn't get the letter? Because it would
Maybe
it would
I'm not understanding the
only
way she's got it written,
if
but
they're employed at the place that made the complaint. You should just. It's a circle. I can't get outside the circle that's in my brain.
Well,
Just
can
just
I,
one sec.
well, he
Jen,
didn't
will you
write it.
please-
so he doesn't know. mean.
Okay, we're going to get to you. So did you want to respond to Vice Chair Brittany's comment?
I think that question is probably better for Board Member Lear because she's proposing this amendment. I may not be understanding her intent.
Okay, let's go to,
I'm saying that if the person, that it does go only to where the person, and if there's a better way to word this, I am open to this. I'm saying this letter itself, which I'm a little uncertain about. On the one hand, it's a letter that's supposed to be advising the educator, but then I'm hearing from Ben it's a form letter, so I'm kind of looking for, is it meaningful or is it not? But the letter itself would only go to the LEA if the person remains employed there. There probably isn't a way to know where a person who's had a disciplinary letter goes to his next job, so that probably would not follow him to the next employer.
so the intent, if I just might, so I can track this, so we can move this forward. The intent of your discussion, but we don't have a proposed amendment or a
Yes.
motion to change, is that it only goes back to the employer where the complaint, or where that person was employed, and limited only to that one particular employer
When the incident happened.
when the
yes.
incident happened.
Yes.
Limit it to that.
Keeping
wanting
in,
to limit that.
keeping in mind, just to
Okay.
clarify though, keeping in mind that the statute Ben read allows former and in fact requires subsequent employers to request material from former employers, so that the former employer, if it has a letter, to Spencer's point, if the case is closed and that, because I added that because it was not in the, it's not now currently in the rule, that the disposition would, the notice of the disposition would go to the former employer. And then the case would be, the file would be complete because the former employer would know that the case was closed with a letter of warning. It just, the details of that warning letter would not go to the employer who now has no relationship with that employee. And so that was the intent of it.
Okay, thank you for that intent. Angie, you wanted to comment?
Yes, just quickly listening to Board Member Lear's intent, I think the easiest amendment would be in that subsection B, just delete everything after the word employment on the second line. So it would say that the executive secretary shall send a copy of the disciplinary letter or dismissal letter to the educator's current LEA of employment, semicolon. Because then the next C would
Right.
apply to a former employer who made the complaint. So you don't really need the red language.
You're right.
So-
That's excellent.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I intended, that if the person's still employed there, then the employer learns. If he's not employed there, that the employer gets a disposition of the case, but not the details of the letter because they chose to part ways.
Right.
Okay, Board Member Reby. Okay. Vice Chair Ellis.
My question's for Ben, and how would this alter how this proposal, how would this alter how you're operating currently?
I mean, we'd write the letter of warning. We'd have to draft a second letter in some circumstances that would contain, I mean, I would see it as largely similar information, but if that's what the board wants done, that's what we'll do.
And
AAG David Thomas, I see you have a
I
comment.
still have a comment that I
I
didn't
know.
get to
We're gonna
finish up
come-
with.
No, I'm just quizzical as to, the nature of the letters and Board Member Lear has indicated that this is a matter of privacy, but if the information that is being sent, the disposition of the case is sent to the original complainant, the original complainant knows what the matter's about. And so they would have the information, so I'm not sure what's being protected by way of privacy, because if they're the complainant, they already know what the complaint was about. The disposition of the letter is that it's going to be resolved on a reprimand. I'm not sure what's being protected.
And
Board Member Lear.
And what in my mind is being protected are the details of what the licensing, and Ben goes both ways in terms of, well, it's not a detailed letter, but it does tell what happened in the incident. So my idea, or my thinking is that there's no reason for this former employer to receive details of what the licensing body found, which could be different, but they're just details. And however it's different, you're right, the former employer knows what it knows.
And they know the detail.
But they may or may not. But I'm just saying, I think that the person who left that employment by his choice or the employer's has a right now to privacy because they've chose to sever a relationship. And there's no reason to send it. And I also, well, I've got one more comment, Chair, but when you're ready.
Save it because we're going to be wrapping this up
Okay.
here pretty quick. Board Member Reby.
So when we think about our educational institutions, we think that it's the same administration year after year. So if you had a problem that lasted for more than a year, you could be sending a letter to someone who had no idea what was going on in the school because the case had gone on so long. So you're now giving details of a case that the current administration might not know anything of. So if I change principals, if I change vice principals, now you're bringing details back to someone who has no knowledge of them. When you're an employee at a school district, there's letters that go in your permanent file and there's letters that go in your temporary file. So if this isn't a letter that's going in your permanent file, why would we be sending it to the school that is holding your temporary file? Because once that principal leaves, his temporary files or her temporary files should not remain for the next principal.
Okay. I guess it's a question to you, Ben.
I mean, I think that's ultimately, I guess, the policy issue here. I think that if I'm an LEA that's reported something to the board, I'm going to want to know what the disposition of that is, and that's the thinking behind sending a copy of that letter to them, because they made an allegation, and so we're sending a copy to that LEA.
Okay. Board Member Cummins, did you have something? Your light's on.
Yes. Are we at the point of call to question or could I? There's no motion
There's no
at the
motion.
table?
This is
Okay,
so
could I, if
I can end the.
Okay, I
I'm
just
making
have
sure everybody speaks, and I'm going to come back to.
if I could just recommend sending it back to committee because I think there's a lot,
I'm going to torture you forever.
but I think if Carol, Board Member Lear is going to have an amendment or if this is going to be discussed further, I would rather see an official drawn out draft so I can know the exact language and not, and know exactly what we're looking at before we pass on something.
Let me just say,
that's
as
just
chair, I can end the debate.
Okay.
And then, which is getting really close because several people have already been able to, it got brought up, Board Member Lear wanted us to come out for some discussion, to get some input. We've had people input. I'm tracking how many follow-up questions. There's been quite a bit of input in this, and I was going to go back to Board Member Lear, who originally made the motion. So that's why I'm getting really close to that, but I see Board Member Stokes. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I'd move that we table the amendment to R277-211.
Second.
Can I finally speak to my,
Okay, well, you can speak to this because we were going from
okay, then I'll just make
debate.
my final.
So we have a motion to table. We have a second. Board Member Lear.
And I just want to conclude with a couple of clarifications. First of all, to Linda's point earlier, I'm not just disagreeing with Ben. I think there's a legal concern at issue here, and I'm gravely concerned about everyone's privacy, students' privacy, employees' privacy, and I think that the teacher's privacy is also a grave concern to me, and I think it should be a concern for all of us. And I think, as Kathleen points out, that lesser discipline does not need to keep haunting a person once you've cut your relationship off either by the employer or the employee, and I think it gives teachers a chance to then move on appropriately because they've already made their choice. I think this is about privacy, and I think any of us have concerns about privacy should also respect teachers' privacy. I also, to Ben's point about the two letters, the disposition letter just says the case of Jane versus John was closed with was closed with a disciplinary letter of warning. It doesn't go into any details. So I see a disposition letter very different than the letter to the employee, that was really intended to explain to that employee what you did wrong and be careful next time. And if they're the same, then I think we're missing an opportunity of training. So I hope that that's clearer now. I still feel this strongly that it should come forward. But at least the board will have discussed it now, and I think the public discussion was what I wanted.
Board Member Wright,
I'll be
speaking
quick.
to the, or no, we have a motion, but
Board Member Lair, I have a quick question. I would think, if some school district is trying to know how to manage their human resources and their teachers, if an incident happened in their district, they would want to know the end result.
Right.
The claim against them, because they're trying to manage and create policies and tell their staff, this is good, this is bad, and if you do this bad, this is what happens, up at UPAC. So, I mean, and just, if they reported it properly. So, but why don't we want to then send the dismissal letter or disciplinary letter to the district where it happened? I would think those people have a vested interest in seeing the full outcome and ramifications of that and need to be thinking about that. This happened in their district. They're responsible for it. They need to know what happened.
Then I think then,
Board
Joel,
Member
can I
Lear,
respond
just
to
one
that?
more, and then we're gonna vote on this.
Can I respond to that?
Yes.
I think, Joel, that's a policy decision. I personally think knowing how the case was closed was enough. But if you believe that, there's nowhere in this rule that tells the LEA that will be receiving this what to do with it. So that's an additional concern. Doesn't tell them to keep it, doesn't tell them to not keep it. And if then somebody wanted to send a grammar request to get it, to find out about it, we don't even know where it is. So I think it's doubly punishing to the educator because he doesn't even have a chance, maybe his supporters don't have a chance to even recover it because there's nothing in the rule about maintaining it. So I think it's just it's left hanging and isn't fair to the employee primarily.
Okay, we have a motion to suspend. We vote on it. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
And what's the motion to suspend? To table.
Oh, table. How come I wrote suspend? Okay, to table. All right, sorry. Let me restate the motion. The motion is to table. So let's vote again. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
No.
Motion passes with one no. Okay,
Ready to continue?
please do.
Okay, board bylaws. So you may or may not remember that law and licensing is going through all the board bylaws and making amendments. And so we went through one section, there was one amendment suggested, and we passed that motion. It was about board self-evaluation, and it says that it should happen every even year, but those are election years, so I thought it was probably better to do it in odd years. So that was the amendment, but but we'll be voting on all of that at a later date, all the bylaws together at a later date.
Okay.
And could I just make one more comment, Chair, before I close?
Yes.
It'll be short. So I just wanted you to know, a lot of times we do things and we don't know the result of what we do. And some of the things we do are kind of mundane. But I want you to know that the rule that we just passed on special ed is important. It's an important rule. It's an important change. District special ed directors from all over the state have been calling me and asking me when we were going to pass that rule so they can implement it. It will change the lives of thousands of kids. So thank you for doing that.
Okay, thank you. Concludes the Law and Licensing Committee report.